Ranita Nunu Williams was always online, her presence lighting up timelines and news feeds. A mother of three, full of energy, full of life. Friends and family knew her as vibrant, outspoken, someone who never hesitated to share her world. But on the morning of April 12, 2018, her final live stream would be nothing like the rest. It was no longer about sharing memories, no longer about connecting with loved ones. This time, the world watched helplessly as fear took over her voice, as a nightmare unfolded in real time. How did it come to this? Shreveport, Louisiana, a city filled with history, culture, and a tight-knit community. It's where 27-year-old Ranita Williams was born and raised. To those who knew her, she was a loving mother, a devoted daughter, a sister who always had a joke ready. But to the thousands who followed her on Facebook, she was something more. Ranita wasn't just a name. She was a personality, one that thrived on social media. Whether it was sharing moments with her kids, posting about her day, or playfully clapping back at online drama, she lived her life openly. And that's what made her story so devastating. What started as a simple social media exchange would end in a way no one could have imagined. Was there any way to see it coming? Was there any way to stop it? April 12, 2018. The live button is pressed, and the world watches. Before her name was etched into headlines, before her final moments were broadcasted for the world to see, Ranita Williams was simply Nunu to those who loved her. A daughter, a sister, and most importantly, a mother. She had 3 children who were the center of her world. No matter what struggles she faced, she made sure they felt love, warmth, and joy. She worked hard, always pushing forward, always striving for a better life. Her energy was infectious, the kind of person who could lift a room just by walking in. Friends described her as lively, full of humor, never one to hold back her thoughts. And in a world where everything seemed to be moving online, Ranita found her space. Facebook wasn't just an app on her phone. It was a part of her daily life. She shared everything, from playful videos to heartfelt moments to opinions that sometimes stirred reactions. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind. She wasn't afraid to be seen. To many, it was entertainment. To her, it was self-expression. But social media has a way of making things seem one way on the surface, while hiding something much deeper underneath. Because behind the filters, behind the laughter, behind the posts that made her followers engage, there was a reality no one fully saw. A reality that was about to catch up with her. Jonathan Robinson was 36 years old, a man with a past that carried more than just mistakes, it carried violence. Those who knew him understood that his temper was never far from the surface. His name was already in police records long before he met Ranita. Assault, domestic abuse, threats. His history was filled with warning signs. But as it often happens, the worst of his behavior wouldn't fully reveal itself until it was too late. At some point, their paths crossed, and Ranita, young, full of life, and trusting, welcomed him into her world. What started as a connection quickly became a relationship. And at first, it might have seemed like things were fine. But relationships don't always break with a single moment. Sometimes they unravel slowly, piece by piece, until the damage is undeniable. Robinson wasn't just involved with Ranita. He had another woman, a woman named Sharika, living in Texas. Ranita may not have known at first. But when the truth surfaced, it was clear. His attention was divided, his loyalty elsewhere. The late-night phone calls that went unanswered, the messages that seemed vague, the disappearances that couldn't be explained. Ranita had always been outspoken. If something wasn't right, she wouldn't sit in silence. And in the fall of 2017, she made her choice. She ended it. For her, it was a step toward freedom, a way to move forward, away from the lies, the deception, the stress. She wasn't going to compete for someone's affection. She wasn't going to stay in a situation that made her feel less than she deserved. And she didn't waste time looking back. She moved on. She found someone new. But some people don't take rejection lightly. Some people see it as an insult, as an attack. Robinson wasn't the kind of man to accept being left behind. And even though RanNita had walked away, even though she had started a new chapter, she had no idea that the last one wasn't finished yet. Not for him. Have you ever experienced or witnessed the challenges of ending a toxic relationship? What advice would you give to someone trying to leave? By early 2018, RanNita had moved on with her life. She was focused on her children, her family, and her new relationship. To her, Jonathan Robinson was the past, just another chapter closed and left behind. But Robinson wasn't done, and neither was Sharika. RanNita's presence on social media had always been bold, unfiltered, and unapologetic. She spoke her mind, and she wasn't afraid of confrontation. But in March 2018, the conflict she thought she had left behind came roaring back to life. It started with a video. Sharika, the woman Robinson had been involved with during his relationship with RanNita, took to Facebook with a post filled with insults. She mocked RanNita, calling her out in front of a public audience. It was direct, pointed, and meant to humiliate. For many, a video like that might have been ignored. But RanNita? She wasn't the type to let something like that go unanswered. She fired back with a video of her own. She defended herself, pushing back against the insults, making it clear that she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not another woman involved with Robinson, disrespect her so publicly. But what RanNita may not have realized in that moment was that this was more than just a war of words, more than just social media drama. This wasn't just a personal argument being played out online. This was a trigger. And behind the scenes, Robinson was watching. He had already lost control over RanNita when she left him. Now he saw her standing her ground, refusing to back down, refusing to be silenced. He saw her living her life without fear, moving forward without him. And he wasn't just angry. He was humiliated. Social media had turned into something more than a place to share memories or connect with friends. It had become a battleground. A simple video post, a few minutes of heated words, would set off a chain of events that no one could take back. Do you think social media amplifies personal disputes? Have you ever seen online conflicts escalate beyond what anyone intended? Share your thoughts in the comments. April 12, 2018. For RanNita Williams, it started as an ordinary morning. She got her children ready for the day, making sure they were fed, dressed, and off to school. It was part of her routine, the life of a devoted mother. And when she returned home, she had no idea that within hours, her name would make headlines. She had no idea that someone was watching, waiting, and ready to strike. Sometime before noon, RanNita was at home with her mother and brother. And then, without warning, Jonathan Robinson arrived. He wasn't invited. He wasn't expected. But he was armed. He forced his way inside, his presence immediately shifting the air. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't a conversation. This was a confrontation with only one possible ending. Tension filled the room. The anger in Robinson's eyes was unmistakable. The man RanNita had once been in a relationship with was gone. The man standing before her now was someone different, someone consumed by rage, by vengeance. Her mother, sensing the danger, managed to escape the house. She ran. She called the police. But inside, RanNita was trapped. She was face to face with a man who didn't just want to hurt her. He wanted to humiliate her. And in the age of social media, there was only one way to do that. He made her go live, with a gun pointed at her. RanNita had no choice but to start a Facebook Live video. She sat there, forced to apologize to Sharika, forced to address the very woman who had publicly insulted her weeks earlier. But this wasn't about an apology. This was about power. This was about control. Robinson paced back and forth behind her, waving his gun, his voice filled with threats, his presence looming over her like a shadow she couldn't escape. RanNita's voice trembled. She pleaded, her words barely masking the terror she felt. "Stop, Jonathan," she begged. "Why are you doing this?" Her fear was real. It was raw. And it was being broadcasted to anyone watching. Hundreds of viewers tuned in, some confused, some concerned, some not fully understanding what was happening. And then, suddenly, the screen went dark. By the time police arrived, Robinson wasn't backing down. He fired his weapon, forcing officers into an 80-minute standoff. Bullets flew. One officer was struck, but survived. And inside the house, Ranita had no protection, no escape. She was shot. Once. Twice. And then again. 6 bullets tore through her body. The same woman who had once used social media to share her joy, her life, her personality, now lay motionless in the very place she should have been safe. When the standoff ended, Robinson was taken into custody. But the damage was already done. A life was stolen. A mother was gone. And the world had witnessed a nightmare unfold in real time. Violence had been live-streamed before. But this wasn't a movie. This wasn't a scene from a script. This was real. A chilling reminder of just how quickly a situation can turn deadly. And how, sometimes, the people watching can do nothing to stop it. The news spread quickly. By the time the last bullet was fired, by the time the police finally took Jonathan Robinson into custody, it was too late. Ranita was gone. A mother of 3. A daughter. A sister. A friend. Her life had been stolen in the most public, terrifying way possible. And now, all that remained was the grief of those left behind. Word of her murder rippled through Shreveport like a shockwave. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. Friends called each other in panic. Family members collapsed in sorrow. The live stream had reached people in real time, but now the aftermath was setting in. And as the reality of Ranita's death became clearer, the community did what they could to honor her. Vigils were held. Candles flickered in the night as people gathered to grieve. Flowers were left outside her home. Prayers were spoken. Tears fell. People who had known Ranita personally shared stories of her kindness, her laughter, her love for her children. And even those who had never met her felt the weight of her loss. But beyond the sorrow, there was also anger. This wasn't just another tragedy. This was a brutal reminder of something far bigger, something that happens far too often. Ranita wasn't the first woman to be killed by an ex-partner. She wasn't the first victim of domestic violence. And she wouldn't be the last. The conversation had begun. How had this happened? What warning signs were missed? What could have been done to stop it? And then, the bigger question. How can communities better support victims of domestic violence? Experts spoke out. Advocates for domestic violence victims called for change. Some pointed to the role of social media, how public disputes can escalate into real-world violence. Others focused on the justice system, questioning how a man with a history of violent behavior was still free to commit such a crime. But at the center of it all was Ranita, a woman who had tried to move on, a woman who should have been safe, and a woman whose life was cut short in a way no one could forget. Jonathan Robinson didn't just wake up one day and decide to kill. Violence was already a part of who he was. It had been for years. Before he forced his way into Ranita Williams' home, before he made her go live on Facebook, before he pulled the trigger, he had already left a trail of destruction behind him. A history of violence. A history of control. A history of women who had suffered at his hands. Robinson had been in trouble with the law before. Domestic abuse. Assault. Threats. Each charge should have been a warning. Each arrest should have been an opportunity to stop him. But he always walked free. Court records reveal that Robinson had multiple domestic violence charges before the murder of Ranita Williams. Women had come forward. Complaints had been filed. But like so many cases of domestic abuse, the system failed to hold him accountable in a way that could have prevented this tragedy. Statistics show that when an abuser has a history of violence, the danger only escalates over time. Many victims of domestic violence don't survive the second or third attack. And in some cases, like Ranita's, the final act is fatal. So why wasn't Robinson stopped earlier? Was it because the justice system doesn't take domestic abuse seriously enough? Was it because the warnings from previous victims were ignored? Or was it simply because, for men like him, Consequences rarely seem to come until it's too late? The reality is chilling. Ranita wasn't his first victim, but she was his last. And the question that lingers now is, could her death have been prevented? Jonathan Robinson was still holding the gun when police finally took him into custody. He had just fired over a dozen rounds. He had already shot an officer. And worst of all, he had ended the life of Ranita Williams. But now, for the first time that day, he no longer had control. Now, the justice system would decide his fate. The case against Jonathan Robinson was open and shut. There was no question of who pulled the trigger. No mystery to unravel. He had killed Ranita on camera, in front of thousands of live viewers. There were witnesses. Police officers had been at the scene during the standoff. There was no escape, no way to deny what he had done. And because of that, prosecutors wasted no time. Robinson was charged with first-degree murder, along with multiple counts of attempted murder for firing at law enforcement. Louisiana is one of the states that still allows the death penalty. And for a crime this brutal, this public, this calculated, many believed Robinson would face it. But instead, he made a deal. In a move that some saw as an attempt to spare himself, Robinson pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a life sentence without parole. He would never walk free again. He would never hurt another woman. But he would also never face execution for what he did. The judge's words were clear. Jonathan Robinson would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He would never see the outside world again. No possibility of release. No second chances. A man who had spent years terrorizing women. A man who had left a path of destruction. His freedom was gone. For some, the sentence brought relief. For Ranita's family, knowing that Robinson could never harm anyone else was a small comfort in the face of unbearable loss. But for others, it raised a larger issue. How many warnings had there been? How many opportunities had the system missed to stop Robinson before he took a life? How many women had to suffer before he was finally locked away? The justice system did what it was supposed to after the murder. But did it do enough before to prevent it? Do you believe the justice system adequately protects victims of domestic violence? Or does it too often wait until it's too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ranita Williams wasn't just a name in a headline. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. And when Jonathan Robinson pulled that trigger, he didn't just end her life. He shattered the lives of everyone who loved her. Ranita was the mother of 3 children. Children who woke up on April 12, 2018, completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. She had sent them off to school that morning, just like any other day. They had no idea that when they left home, it would be the last time they would ever see their mother alive. Ranita's children were young, too young to understand why she wasn't coming back, too young to process the depth of what had happened. One moment, they had a mother who laughed with them, who held them, who told them she loved them. The next, she was gone. And all that remained were the questions no child should ever have to ask. Where's Mommy? Why won't she come home? Why did this happen? Ranita's mother and siblings were left to bear the unimaginable weight of her absence. Her mother, who had managed to escape the house that day, was haunted by the memory of her daughter's final moments. Her brother, who had been in the house when Robinson stormed in, was left with the trauma of witnessing the horror unfold. And now, they weren't just grieving her loss. They were left with a responsibility they never expected, to raise and support the 3 children she left behind. In the face of tragedy, her family refused to let her be forgotten. They spoke out about domestic violence awareness, hoping that Ranita's story could save someone else from the same fate. They fought to ensure that her children would never forget who their mother was, not just the way she died, but the way she lived. A woman full of energy. A woman who loved deeply. A woman who deserved so much more than the fate she was given. Losing a loved one to violence is a pain that never fully heals. But in the wake of loss, Ranita's family found strength. Strength to raise her children. Strength to speak out. Strength to make sure that, even in death, Ranita Story would not be silenced. Ranita Williams' story is a chilling reminder of how personal conflicts can escalate in the digital age. Social media, a platform meant for connection, became a stage for hostility, where online disputes turned deadly. Her tragic fate raises a critical question. How can we better protect ourselves in an era where private struggles are increasingly public? One of the most haunting aspects of this case is the series of red flags that went unnoticed or unaddressed. Robinson's history of violence, his obsession with Ranita, and his growing resentment were all warning signs. Yet, as with many cases of domestic violence, intervention came too late. Recognizing these signs, controlling behavior, intimidation, and persistent threats can mean the difference between life and death. For those experiencing similar situations, seeking help is vital. No one should have to navigate the dangers of an abusive relationship alone. Organizations such as the National Domestic Violence Hotline offer support and resources for those at risk. If you or someone you know is facing threats or abuse, reaching out could save a life. Ranita's story is heartbreaking, but it serves as a lesson. Awareness, early intervention, and community support can prevent another tragedy like this. The question now is, will we listen? Ranita Williams' story is more than a tragedy. It's a wake-up call. A reminder of how quickly unresolved tensions past violence and the power of social media can collide with devastating consequences. Her life was taken too soon, leaving behind grieving children, a shattered family, and a community forever changed. But her story doesn't have to be in vain. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's the importance of vigilance. If you see warning signs of abuse, whether in your own life or in someone else's, don't ignore them. Speak up, reach out, and support those who may feel trapped in dangerous situations. Sometimes, the right intervention can mean the difference between life and death. What are your thoughts on this case? Have you or someone you know ever faced a similar situation? Share your experiences in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if you found this story important, consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. It could help someone recognize the signs before it's too late.